morning, everyone, and welcome to the Energy Storage Stakeholder Call for the Draft Final Proposal. My name is Brenda Corona, representing the ISO Stakeholder Affairs at the California ISO. I'll be facilitating today's meeting, and I'm also joined by Gabe Murtaugh, Storage Sector Manager, Market Infrastructure Policy, Bill Weaver, Senior Counsel Assistant General Counsel for Tariff, Kevin Head, Senior Market Engineering Specialist, and Katie Wickler from Market Engineering Specialist, both from Market Analysis Group. And today's presentation and paper are actually available now on the webpage on CAISO.com. Stay informed and click under Policy Initiatives, where you'll drop down to see Energy Storage Enhancements. Before we get started, I do have a few meeting reminders to go over with you, as this call will be recorded and for informational and convenience purpose only. Any related transcriptions should not be reprinted without the ISO's permission. As well, this call is structured to stimulate open dialogue and engage different perspectives. During the call, you're welcome to raise your hand and ask questions, and we will call on you. Also, the instructions to asking a question is that if you're dialed in using the Call Me function, select the raise hand icon, and that'll indicate to us that you have a question as well. So for those who are on the phone line, press pound 2 to be able to ask a question. And if you also have questions, you can also submit them through chat via Brenda Corona, myself, or to all panelists, so that way we could review your questions and present them to the group. With that, the next slide, we'll present this agenda as we will go over for the policy summary, and then we will do a dive in through Storage Day-Ahead Default Energy Bid by Gabe, and he'll go over the remaining draft final proposal details, as well as a Q&A for the group. And then I will close for next steps. In this policy initiative stakeholder process, at this time, we moved our arrows to the right where we're standing at the draft final proposal. So that's a great sign for our stakeholder group to know that we're moving right along the way on path towards proposal development. Our next steps will be discussed in this call, as well as any other updates of papers being posted for this initiative. And now I'll go ahead and introduce Gabe to go over for the next few updates.
Thanks, Brenda. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody who's on the phone joining us today from outside of the ISO. We certainly appreciate your engagement on this topic and your continued feedback and really good thoughts and comments as we progress through this policy. So, as Brenda indicated, we're in a draft final proposal stage right now. The next iteration of the policy paper will be a final proposal, and that's really just to codify the overall policy direction of what we're proposing, and it's not necessarily to work out all the implementation details, but that policy proposal that's going to be included in the final proposal is really the framework for the information that we're going to be presenting at the Board of Governors and then eventually filing for tariff changes at FERC. So that's sort of where we are. With that in mind, I would specify that from the second revised straw proposal to this draft final proposal, we really haven't made any drastic changes to the policy. I think, certainly the scope of the policy has been relatively stable. Most of the proposals in the policy has been relatively stable. I think we're kind of zeroing in on the solutions on most of the areas, although I think there are some topics that are still being debated, and there's still some questions about how the ISO is planning to move forward. I think there is still some room to work out some of those details moving from the draft final proposal to the final proposal, but again, I'm not anticipating huge changes from the draft final to the final proposal as we move forward, although we are still in a proposal phase and things still could change, but I think things are becoming more and more firm. So kind of with that in mind, I know we've had a lot of stakeholder meetings over the last few months, and we've gone into a lot of detail on a lot of the topics. I think all the questions, comments, concerns are still valid at this point, and we're happy to hear any burning issues or questions during this meeting. But if there aren't questions and stakeholders feel relatively confident with what we're proposing, or maybe feel like some of the commentary is a little bit more minor, we're happy to hear you on that. We're happy to again review comments and think about challenge where we are in the policy along those lines, but it may not be necessary to go through all of the details on each specific topic today. So we're kind of presenting more at a high level than getting into all the details of every single proposal. I did include some specific bullets and sub-bullets on some of the asks for clarification in the comments for the second revised straw proposal. I think there were a fair number of those, and I did want to be specific and at least call out the ones that at least we heard, 2 or 3 or 4 more times in some of the comments, which we really do appreciate, and I strongly believe that all those comments and the feedback in aggregate is making this proposal better, and we're better able to move forward. I think kind of along those same lines, this discussion today may not go the full 3 hours. I know some of the other previous discussions have gone even a little bit long, but again, as we're getting more solid, more firm, hopefully or potentially this meeting may go a little bit faster. We do have the full 3 hours, and I'm happy to use the full 3 hours if we need it for discussion, which I think it would be fair game. I do have more detailed slides on the default energy bid. This is sort of the newer aspect of the proposal. We added this as an addendum to the second revised straw proposal. So of all the topics that we're covering today, this is by far the newest, and I did want to spend a little bit more time talking about default energy bids. I've also moved, even though this was just an addendum to the second revised straw proposal, I have moved these comments on the default energy bid up to the beginning part of the proposal today, and we'll work through the details there. Yeah, any questions are welcome on any specific topic on the policy process, the current proposal, whatever we've got. So please feel free to include those. The other item that I think is fairly large and fairly substantive is that we did get a lot of questions on the details for the local concerns that we had been bringing up and we were intending to include in part of the reliability section of the paper. I think in, looking at that part of the proposal internally and thinking about the development effort of that component and thinking about likely the level of detail that we had heard requested from stakeholders, I think we were at a point where it probably makes more sense to start talking about those in the Storage Modeling Enhancements Initiative, which is the initiative that we're opening up to talk about the energy storage resource model and other modeling improvements that we could potentially make to the existing NGR model. But for now, it probably does not make sense to continue and go to the board and eventually file at FERC with the issues that we've been outlining in the local section of the second revised straw proposal. I think this will also give us a little bit more time just to vet the proposal that we've got out there and develop a more robust proposal just going forward and allow for more time to get stakeholder feedback into that proposal. Yeah, I've already kind of covered the final proposal, but we will be posting that after we get comments from this proposal. So I think we've got a 2-week comment period, which is our typical timeline. We will be posting a final proposal. We are also working internally, and I know for a fact that these are coming together on draft business requirements. So these will be vetted and stakeholdered through their normal process. And then we're also already putting together draft tariff language, which will also be vetted through a open stakeholder process process, and that's something that we will collect feedback on prior to filing at FERC. So those are things to kind of be aware of in terms of this process as we move forward more from a policy phase into drafting actual requirements and implementation. We are still planning to go to the Board of Governors meeting in October 2022. So I think those meetings are kind of in the later part of October. But what that means from an internal perspective, we will be working on these business requirements and draft tariff language in the interim between now and that mid-October Board of Governors date. But that is kind of where we're heading in terms of this policy. So let's go on to the next slide. I just wanted to lay out what the scope of this paper looks like. Hopefully nobody is really surprised about this. Aside from the local issues, this is primarily the scope that we've been talking about for a few iterations with the inclusion of the storage default energy bid. So let me just run through this outline very quickly. We still have a few proposals for enhancements to reliability. We are proposing improved accounting for state of charge while we're providing regulation. So this is that state of charge formula today. It only includes energy. We want to add the regulation component to it. We want to have enhanced bidding requirements for storage resources. This is going to help ensure that they're always there to provide ancillary services. And we want to have tools that enhance our operators' exceptional dispatch so that they can send instructions for storage resources to hold state of charge. And then also, I think as we've been through, the ISO's outlined how we're going to be compensating resources that are receiving those exceptional dispatches. We also have some proposals to the co-located model and how we would like to change that going forward. And I think a lot of this is driven by, the comments and the dialogue that we've had with stakeholders, through this initiative and through other meetings that we've had. But basically, we're planning to implement an electable mechanism to prevent grid charging. We are planning to extend the co-located model to apply to pseudo-tie resources. And I think those two changes would be very beneficial from what we've heard for the operation of storage resources on our grid. We're also planning to make an improvement, and maybe improvement is a little bit of a strong word, but we're making an update or a change to the day-ahead default energy bid so that we're including an opportunity cost component in that calculation. The calculation there is going to mirror the real-time calculation, and that's kind of how we're proposing moving forward on this. So I will get into, like I said, I'm not going to get into details of every single one of these topics, but I do have a slide on every single one of these topics. So if we have specific questions or concerns about any one of these topics, I'm going to ask that we hold off on them until we get to the slide. But if there's any specific questions about the overall process that we're going through, or kind of what the next steps are, I'm happy to take those right now.
All right, we do have a caller in queue. Susan, your line is unmuted.
Hi, Gabe. Susan Schneider, Phoenix Consulting. I was a little confused about some of the things you said in your introduction. I just wanted to make sure I understood what we were doing. You mentioned that you perhaps were not going to include all of the implementation details. Were you just talking about the discussion today, or do you talk, because there's some implementation details that we had covered in our comments that don't appear to be in the proposal. Are you saying that you're not going to include those in what goes to the board, or are you saying are you going to address them in tariff language? Where would the implementation details be determined?
Yeah, implementation details are usually part of the business requirements, and those are usually vetted with stakeholders as we're developing them. And we'll obviously have the letter of the law spelled out in the tariff and the filings for the tariff as we go forward. And Susan, I know you asked about some specific things related to the co-located model, and I do have some updates for you as we get into that part of the presentation. So I'm hoping these comments in this slide deck will help to address some of your concerns.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
Okay, so you're mainly we're talking about, okay, so there, even though the details are not may not, we're not in the proposal, some of the details may be in the slide deck, and I'm happy to wait for that discussion. But you are still planning including those details in the filing at FERC, is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you very much, I appreciate it. I'll wait on the specific questions till we get there.
Okay, great. Thanks, Susan. Tegan, any other questions?
I'm not showing any other questions at this time.
Okay, great. Let's go ahead into the discussion on the storage day-ahead default energy bid. This is, so I think we're on slide 07. Oh, here we go. Great, thank you. So this is what we talked about in the appendix paper that we published for the second revised straw proposal, and then we had a phone call stakeholder meeting on this just a couple weeks ago. But essentially today we do have a formulation for the day-ahead default energy bid that's available for storage resources to use. The way that formulation is crafted right now includes 3 different components, and they're outlined on this slide. So there is a energy component, and the energy component is this EN term, and it involves calculating or estimating what the ISO thinks the cost for the storage resource would be to charge, and how much it's going to have to pay for energy to charge. And that calculation is driven by what the duration of the resources, so most of the storage resources on the ISO system today are 4-hour duration, and then what the round-trip efficiencies of the resource are. So most lithium-ion batteries that are on our system have round-trip efficiencies in the neighborhood of about 85%. So you can think if you've got a plus or minus 100 megawatt battery with up to 400 megawatt hours of potential storage capability, then you can, and there's a 85% round-trip efficiency, you can do the math, and you're looking at about 5 hours of charging in order to get the resource fully charged. So we can use, and we do use, the lowest priced hours of the day as an input to estimate what that cost of energy would be. We also set a floor and don't consider energy values that are less than 0, because you could potentially think about times in the spring when prices may be negative, so you're actually being paid to take energy off of the grid. Once you introduce a negative into this equation, kind of weird things start happening when you apply a multiplier, and you get some unintended outcomes from the default energy bid. So we did apply a floor of $0 per megawatt hour onto that particular term. You take the cost of the energy and you add to that this rho value, which is the variable cost that the resource would incur. We've been thinking about this, and how we've been talking about it is primarily the wear and tear on the resource, but it could include some other values as well. But this is the cell degradation that a storage resource might encounter when a resource is charging and discharging, and it's specific to the energy that would be discharging from that one cycle on that one particular day. And this is something that the ISO does not estimate. It's given to the ISO or provided to the ISO by the scheduling coordinator, who provides some documentation and justifies what this value is, that's used as a fixed dollar per megawatt hour parameter in the default energy bid. Finally, this calculation is rounded out by a multiplier, an additional 10%, just to kind of accommodate some of the differences between expectations and the actual outcomes of the market, because obviously we're running this prior to the market actually being finalized, and we don't know what the actual outcomes are going to be, and this is just an estimate. So in the next slide, we get into some of the the details of how we want to enhance the formula. We want to add this OC sub-delta term, and that refers to opportunity costs. I think for those of you who are following along, that results in this day-ahead storage default energy bid exactly matching the real-time storage default energy bid formulation. So today, the formulations are slightly different. The day-ahead does not include this opportunity cost term. The real-time default energy bid does. What we're proposing is to update the day-ahead default energy bid so that it does include this opportunity cost term. And the primary reason why we're doing that is so that the storage resources that are participating in the day-ahead market and could potentially be mitigated by this default energy bid aren't mitigated to a point where the DEB would allow resources to be dispatched at prices that are lower than the peak duration of the resource. So, for example, if you're talking about a 4-hour battery, obviously, and the peak 4-hour prices on the market were, say, above $100 per megawatt hour, you wouldn't want to dispatch the resource at an interval when prices were lower than $100 per megawatt hour. So maybe say in the hour immediately preceding those peak 4 hours, prices are $90 per megawatt hour. You wouldn't want to discharge the resource then and only get paid $90. The economically efficient outcome is for this storage resource to be discharging during those intervals when prices are $100 per megawatt hour or higher. So initially, when we put this formulation together, we didn't think that that was possible. We thought that the optimization would automatically do that. We actually got some results from actual market experience where exactly what we thought couldn't happen did happen, and it happened because the resource was mitigated during specific hours and not mitigated during all hours, and the mitigation during those specific hours, which were earlier in the afternoon, were causing effectively premature dispatch before these peak hours, which would be economically efficient for the resources to generate and provide output. So the opportunity costs are a function of the duration of the storage resource. So a 1-hour resource is going to have a higher opportunity cost than a 4-hour duration resource, because if you deplete a 1-hour resource, too early, you wouldn't have it available for that peak 1 hour of the day. For a 4-hour resource, you want it to be available for the peak 4 hours, and the peak 1 hour, it's sort of a given that it's going to be there. We're going to be aligning this with the real-time default energy bid, and I think that's everything I wanted to mention on this slide. So let's go ahead to the last slide I had on the default energy bid. Today, when we are estimating the costs for the resource to buy energy, we are doing that from results from the market power mitigation run, not the IFM run of the day-ahead market. So we're running the market power mitigation run. We're using outputs from that run as inputs into the day-ahead formulation for the DEB today, and that's how we're calculating those expected energy costs, and then we're adding that to the row and multiplying by the extra 10% factor. So that's how the calculation is being performed today. The initial thought from the ISO was that we would continue to use the values that we're already bringing into the software that does the calculation for the default energy bid, which includes the sort of vector of costs from the market power mitigation run for LMPs for each specific storage resource, and use that same information to calculate what these opportunity costs are, similar to the way we calculate the opportunity costs for the default energy bid in real time. And we did get some feedback from market participants about this, and I think the concern is along the lines of, if you are operating or if you're looking at prices in the market power mitigation run of the day-ahead market, there's obviously a potential, by nature of the market that you're looking at, that those prices are inflated above what the actual outcomes of the day-ahead market are going to be, because that's the run of the market where where all resources could potentially be exercising market power, because we're not using the mitigated bids for resources in that run, and you could have potentially very high prices, which could result in very high default energy bids, which could result in artificially high prices in the market outcomes, because the default energy bids for storage resources could potentially set prices in the market, and you could get some inefficiencies that way. So I think we're sensitive to that feedback. We want to be careful about how we're going to move forward, and I think we did hear from some market participants in the comments. I think we wanted to just kind of raise this for information to everybody on this call and all of our market participants, and just kind of flag this as a potential issue. And I think our first stance is kind of where we were when we initially proposed this. I think we're thinking about alternatives right now, and how those could potentially work in this formulation, and ultimately the ISO is going to have to propose something, but we are, I think, considering alternatives, and I think one of the alternatives that was outlined in some of the comments was to potentially use the market results, so the final market results from the previous day-ahead market. Obviously, there could be some there could be some issues with doing that too. Day-ahead market results from day to day aren't always super highly correlated. You could have different conditions, particularly in local areas where congestion could be present one day and not the next day. So I think there could be some challenges with potentially implementing something this way as well. But again, I think we'd like to hear comments at least on this aspect of the proposal from stakeholders as we go forward, and we do consider what we're going to put in the final proposal. I am seeing some hands up. Operator, could we go to those questions?
All right, we'll go ahead and take the questions. We'll go to the first caller in queue. Callie, your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Callie Wells with WPTF. First of all, I really appreciate you raising this concern. We were definitely struggling with the idea of creating an opportunity cost to be used in a default energy bid, which is intended to mitigate for market power that could actually reflect market power. So again, appreciate you raising this, and we would definitely be supportive of considering using some other price forming, other prices, whether that's the prior day's day-ahead results, to setting that opportunity cost. So I think maybe in the next iteration, if you could provide some analysis or some examples on that, so we can, really see how correlated day-to-day prices are, and make that decision. So again, thank you so much for raising that one. I also had another question, and it was, has the CAISO given any thought on whether or not the opportunity cost in the day ahead is just in the discharge portion of the DEB, or is it also in the charging portion of the DEB?
Yeah, I think we're currently contemplating having this work the same way that it does in the real-time default energy bid formulation, and in that formulation, it's present in both the charging and the discharging portions of the bid, of the default energy bid.
Okay, and has there been any thought on whether or not maybe having it only reflected in the discharge, so that it ensures that even when a resource is mitigated, its entire bid from its charge to its discharging range still maintains some sort of price separation between the charging and discharging? Because there can be cases where the resource is mitigated and it ends up in a flat DEB across the entire operating range.
Yeah.
So if you've given any thought to that, I'd love to hear it.
Okay, yeah, I think we've given a little bit of thought to that, and I know we talked a little bit about it in the ESDR meetings, and we had those, which were, a few years ago at this point. But I think the premise is that, when you're talking about opportunity costs, and I think they're more, I think this is more of a concern in the day-ahead market than the real-time market, because in the day-ahead market, you're really thinking more about holistically what the resource is buying, what costs the resource is paying to buy energy at, and what costs the resource is being paid to sell energy at, and you're performing the optimization over a full 24-hour period where you really are thinking about the buys and the sells for the storage resources. So I think that is relevant in that space. I don't know. I think maybe I get a little bit of concern when we're talking about an opportunity cost, and if I'm a 4-hour battery, I'm thinking about the fourth highest hour price in the day-ahead market, and if a storage resource is going to be bidding charging energy above that fourth highest hour price, even without knowing what the day-ahead market is going to clear at, that does give me a little bit of pause, because why would let's just say the fourth highest hour is $100 per megawatt hour. Why is the resource bidding $100 per megawatt hour to charge across some of the hours of the day when it could potentially be mitigated? So I don't know. I think I'd have to think more about specific scenarios where this would be an issue. In the real-time market, I don't see this as much of an issue, because the real-time LMPs are really driving either charging instructions or discharging instructions in one particular binding interval, and I think mitigating down to one price is appropriate in that space.
Okay, that was really helpful, and we'll give it some more thought on whether or not it makes more sense to only include it in the discharging portion, just to ensure there's still you don't end up in a situation with a flat deb. Okay, thank you.
Thanks for the questions, Callie. I really appreciate it.
All right, we'll go to the next caller in queue. Alva, your line is unmuted.
Good morning. This is Alva Svoboda from PG&E Highgate. How are you doing?
Hey, good morning, Alva. Doing really well.
First, it was a follow-up on what Callie was suggesting. I think mitigation, assuming that you're already saying, well, we're going to take a higher discharge price potentially via this opportunity cost. If the bid were flat, the only way you could mitigate would be to mitigate the charge bid down, not up. And so I think that's, I'm not sure if she was suggesting that you could have an opportunity cost that would cause you to bid higher, and that should essentially drive the bid, which would then mean that you would have a discharge bid at a higher price. So I think it's a little problematic to think about. I agree that the issue of a flat curve is problematic, but I'm not sure that mitigation is the right solution there.
Yep.
On the other hand, I do think that there are reasons that people, to counter your argument, there are reasons that people bid higher that don't have to do with their estimate of cost. They have to do with not wanting to charge. Either they've already got state of charge built and they don't, for the hours they prefer to discharge in, or they have other reasons that they don't want to charge. And the way this has been an issue with CAISO bidding, or the entire history of CAISO, is that one of the functions of bids is also to show economic unwillingness to participate in particular hours because of other opportunity costs that can legitimately be captured in the bids. So I think there are reasons that people would bid at a higher level than the fourth highest hour. The comment I was originally going to make is just to ask, my understanding was that in local market power mitigation, there was actually a separation in the congestion price components that were developed in the market power mitigation run. And I may be off by a matter of years, or I may just be inaccurate. But if there were such a separation in the congestion component of the LMP, then one suggestion I would have is just to remove the component that is the so-called market power component of that, which would be the local component of the congestion, and mitigate to the remainder of the LMP at that location. That's something you could obtain from the day's run. It would be relevant to the balance of supply and demand on that day, and therefore it wouldn't have this issue of what I think could be gross inaccuracy of using the previous day's discharge hours as a surrogate. I don't know that, given that this is an increase from the current levels, I'm not personally that concerned about it, because you're basically allowing people to bid at a higher level. But nevertheless, I think if you wanted to do this correctly, the idea of using Sunday's peak prices for determining the opportunity cost for Monday will be wrong almost every week. The heuristics you might apply aren't going to really capture the characteristics of a particular day. So I don't know if that idea of separating out the local component of congestion would allow you to then use the LMPN solution, which would be the ideal approach, I think.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think there's always this balance of, well, how complicated do we want to make it versus, we want something that's implementable, but we also want it to work and be reflective of actual conditions. And I think, realizing that we're on a relatively tight timeline, and we have heard from stakeholders that they do want us to make this change, we may have to think about, what the best solution we can get that's implementable would be, and then maybe we iterate on it from there. But I think that's a good point, Alva, and I really like the way you summarized that. Just on your first part of your comment, I think you had mentioned that storage resources might bid high because they don't want to charge. And I think that might be opposite. You might bid your charging portion high if you did want to charge, right?
Right. Yeah, I think I might have gotten it. It switched around. Yeah.
Okay.
Although I guess the other thing is, if the bid is always constructed in such a way that your discharge is related to the charge by that arbitrage, that might be another reason. But you're right. I had that wrong way around. So thank you for the correction.
And I really don't want to take us down a rabbit hole here, but in the ESDR initiative, and I think in a couple of conversations, some of the workshops since the ESDR initiative, I know that I've talked a little bit about kind of where we want to go as an ISO in terms of market modeling and kind of where we are today. Obviously, today we've got a market construct that works really well with a fleet primarily made up of gas resources that are looking at marginal cost to buy gas right now and how much a prevailing price is on the market, and do I want to sell or do I not want to sell, those kinds of questions. For storage resources, it's a very different operating paradigm. What you buy energy at should be directly related to what you sell energy at. So what I've been saying, and sort of the flag that I've been raising is, as we move from a grid that's primarily operating gas resources, and the gas resources are the marginal resources most of the time, to a grid where we're going to see more and more storage resources, those storage resources are going to be setting the price both on the buy side and the sell side more often, and eventually, it's just going to be the storage resources working with primarily the renewable resources. Do we still want to continue to operate our market and have the same, underlying mechanisms drive the market? I suspect the answer is no. I suspect we want to kind of reformulate how, what the underlying drivers are of the market, and maybe. Well, to me, it sounds like a pretty complete overhaul. But I think, this is kind of thinking out, certainly not in this initiative, probably not even in the next initiative, but we might be thinking out more like a 5-year, 10-year time frame when we really do start to see the makeup of the grid change over time. But I think those are questions that people who are thinking about energy market design are starting to consider right now, and I think the ISO should start getting plugged into some of those conversations because probably what we're doing today isn't going to be sufficient in the future. And I think you're kind of getting at the upper crust of what that problem looks like and how it might start manifesting today for resources.
Well, I totally agree with your thinking about that vision, and you're thinking big thoughts. So thank you, Gabe, for thinking in those terms as well as in these immediate terms.
They can get you in trouble sometimes. Operator, do we have any other hands up?
All right. We'll go to the next caller in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted. Mike, go ahead.
Hey, Gabe. This is Mike McGuffin from CES. I submitted a city ticket a few days ago with just some general statistics on one of the 3 storage resources that we're managing. It's a co-located facility, and just some general concerns about the frequency of mitigation. We're seeing just in the day-ahead market mitigation levels that are multiple times higher than some of the statistics that we saw on the PPP. And we're also seeing issues with, it looks like the mitigation scheme is really pulling SOC to hours of the day, which you wouldn't necessarily think were hours in which you want to utilize that SOC necessarily. So, and I think what you may end up facing is the mitigating units pulling the SOC forward and then not having the SOC available in the peak when you really need it, sort of conflicting with your overall need to have those assets available over the shoulder peak in the afternoon. And then also we're seeing interactions with the co-located VER where the mitigation scheme is actually awarding a unit in an hour where it may work on a day ahead basis because you're dealing with hourly granularity, but once you get into the real time market, that there's a ramp involved, and so that day ahead award becomes infeasible based on the ramp of the VER. That requires forced buybacks. So I know that I just threw out a few topics, but just generally, do you have any comments on the frequency of mitigation and whether you think it is working as intended, and then the issue of pulling or pushing the SOC to hours that
Okay. Yeah. I don't have any, I unfortunately have not looked into your specific city ticket. It does sound like, I think city tickets are more like, oh, I've got an issue with this in the market, or I've got an issue, with the performance of the market, or something's not working quite right. And you might actually be, you might have some of those issues as well, but you might actually be bringing up, hey, I've got some policy issues here where, we may be having some unintended consequences from the DEB interacting with the rest of the market, and we may want to rethink how we're doing this. So I think it'd be really nice. I'd like to hear about the issues that you're having, the specific details, and kind of get to work inside of those details. And I think that that could help inform, maybe not this policy, but as we develop policy for storage resources going forward, I think that could help inform storage. I would just remind everyone that storage is still a relatively new technology on our grid. We've only had default energy bids for these resources, interacting with the market for just a couple of months now. So we are still learning. The market participants are learning. The ISO is learning. And there's a lot sort of moving parts and just kind of getting used to these new resources. So yeah, if you wouldn't mind sending me kind of your thoughts and some of the details about these specific cases, I'd love to, roll up our sleeves and kind of get into the details with you and start thinking about market solutions to some of the issues that you're seeing. But I think that's really important to keep that dialogue and feedback going.
Yeah, I was trying to head off the typical response of submit a certificate, but anyway, I'll send that over and with some thoughts. But I think generally, this year we've been fortunate that we haven't had the fires that we've had in prior years. We have had some heat waves, but we're getting into sort of the teeth of the Q3, and I mean this issue could really be front and center in a hurry. So I would just if basically is somebody looking at the storage mitigation generally and then looking at specifics for say co-located versus standalone to see if there are obvious flaws in the mitigation scheme.
Yeah, let's have that conversation, Mike. I think that's great that you're bringing these things up.
Okay, it might not be the right forum, but there really is, besides the MPP, which won't happen until, I don't know when the next MPP is, there really is no forum for this. So. Okay.
Yeah, I'm committed to taking a look at it and starting to think about it, and obviously I would be, a critical piece in developing policy as the ISO goes forward.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thanks for bringing that up. Operator, do we have any other questions in the queue?
I'm not showing any questions at this time.
Okay, great. Okay, I think this, I know that there are some comments on some of the other aspects of the proposal, and, we've seen the feedback from stakeholders. Like I said, I've tried to address at least some of the things that kind of came up with higher frequency in this slide deck, and we tried to include some of those, some of that feedback in the paper as well. I think, just kind of the highest level one note that I would make is that there were a lot of questions about, what would apply in the real-time market, what would apply in the day-ahead market. I've tried to be really careful in the paper about specifying how those things would work, and I've also added some additional flavor in this slide deck about that as well. So hopefully, hopefully some of those changes that we've incorporated in the draft final proposal are welcome, and they're giving a more robust description of what's going on. So, getting into the meat of the proposal, we do have two ideas and two proposals that we're thinking about for storage resources that are providing ancillary services. The first one is to update the state of charge equation so that it reflects regulation awards. The idea here is that today, and again, we're kind of not, and this is the part of the proposal or the part of the presentation where I'm not planning to go into all the details. Obviously, if market participants would like more details on any one of the topics, we can go into that. But I'm just kind of doing a high level hit the summaries here. We are planning to update the state of charge equation. Today, the state of charge equation has impacts from energy awards, and basically if you get discharged, then your state of charge goes down. If you get charged, your state of charge goes up. And that's basically how the state of charge equation works from interval to interval. What we're planning to do is include a regulation term in that formula, and the regulation term, well, it would be two terms. It would be a term for regulation up and a term for regulation down, because we know that even though you get a 100 megawatt award for regulation up, it's not going to decrease your state of charge by 100 megawatt hours. It's going to be something in between 0 megawatt hours and 100 megawatt hours. We did provide a little bit of analysis on this, and often kind of ends up around the 10% range. So you might decrease your state of charge by about 10 megawatt hours. So the idea would be that we would include the amount of award for regulation up and regulation down in the state of charge equation. We would also append multipliers to that award. So instead of thinking about 100 megawatt award for reg up, reducing your state of charge by 100 megawatt hours. It would be some fraction of that 100 megawatts. That multiplier, initially what we proposed is to have one fixed multiplier, across an entire day, and maybe the ISO goes in and updates that multiplier periodically. I think based on stakeholder feedback and I think based on looking at the high-level review of the data that we've done so far, which was included in the appendix of the paper, we are inclined to propose that the formula include different hourly values for the multiplier. So the multiplier in hour ending 8 is going to be different than the multiplier for hour ending 9 for regulation up. Similarly, the multiplier for regulation down for hour ending 8 is going to be different from the multiplier for regulation down in hour ending 9. And again, this is something that the ISO will specify what the multipliers are in the business practice manual, so those will be available, and folks will know how. Well, first of all, I think they'll know what the expectations are for how much a regulation award in either direction would impact their particular resource. Just give them a ballpark number during any particular hour. But then second of all, it's going to help our modeling of state of charge become more accurate, and then kind of these outcomes that we see in today's market, where we see day-ahead outcomes where storage resources could be potentially providing multiple consecutive hours of regulation down without any, or regulation up without any energy award. Hopefully you won't see that if that's not really feasible from a state of charge perspective anymore from market outcomes. And I think we got some really good feedback there from stakeholders on this aspect of the initiative. I do also think that we got some feedback saying, hey, look, we want to know what the formula is going to be to calculate what these multipliers are. I think, I will say quite frankly, I don't think that the ISO has worked out these details yet. We want to have a methodology for calculating these that's going to do a good job capturing how state of charge is going to change, and I don't think we're ready to quite specify precisely the methodology that we're proposing to use yet. Obviously, we're going to have to come up with a methodology sometime in between now and implementation, but we're going to continue to work on that, and we will most likely through what we're proposing is changes to our BPM process, be including that methodology kind of in that write-up. So we'll continue to think about that. We might have some more information by the time we get to our final proposal, and if we do, I will certainly be including some of those details in the slide deck that we present then, and the write-up of the draft final proposal itself. The second proposal that we're thinking about is a requirement to have bids alongside ancillary service awards. And there was some commentary in the paper, and I feel like this is probably the hottest issue, if you will, that's still out there. But we feel that this requirement addresses a separate problem than the first change that we're talking about here. This issue and requiring bids is what will allow the ISO to ensure that a storage resource could potentially continue to keep providing regulation if it runs out of state of charge during any particular time interval in the real-time market. Without some rule like this, you really could get into situations where storage resources can't provide an ancillary service that they were signed up for. And I think that is an issue that our operators are experiencing today, and they're actually seeing this happen with resources. I think some of the comments that we got in the paper kind of said, well, you've got this new update to the state of charge equation, and if you get the state of charge equation just right, you really shouldn't need this second item because you won't schedule any ancillary services that are infeasible. I think to some extent that's true, But on the other hand, there's going to be situations where, I think the first proposal here is sort of thinking about, well, what's going to happen to a resource on average if it's providing regulation? It's not spelling out what's going to happen to resources every single time that they're providing regulation. You could certainly get scenarios where a resource is more depleted than you thought it was going to be and actually can't provide the ancillary service that it was signed up for. And this is sort of the conditions in the scenario where we're really trying to guard against and give the ISO an ability to get that resource charged up so that it can provide the ancillary services that it needs. There were some other comments in the paper about, well, what if your requirement wasn't 50% in terms of the bidding for each interval? What if it was something less? I think that our analysis shows that on some intervals you may not need 50%. What we haven't done is, a detailed sensitivity analysis to say, well, 95% of the time, if a resource was bidding X amount of energy, you'd be sufficient under these scenarios when it's providing regulation or another ancillary service. So I think we could potentially dig into that a little bit more, and I think there is some ability to tailor those requirements during specific hours. But right now, we just haven't done the analysis to ensure that, again, we'd be relatively safe and have our resources charged when we need them to be charged to provide ancillary services. And I think this bottom bullet is kind of what we've already covered. I do have, if folks want to get into additional details, we certainly can. I see that there's a few hands up, so maybe I'll pause here and just take those questions that we've got.
All right, we're going to go to the phone first. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, Dave. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vista. Can you hear me?
I can, Kathleen. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for going through the slides. I guess I have a question for you that's a little bit more process-oriented. Mm-hmm. I know that we had a lot of questions about this the proposal, and it's primarily the proposal to revise the state of charge, but mm-hmm. I think they're interrelated to the energy bid one as well. And I was curious if, I don't believe that the version you just posted had like a comment, stakeholder comment made. Mm-hmm. Are you planning to put one out, or did I may have missed it, but yeah, I just wanted to ask that process question first.
Yeah, I think that's a good process question. We obviously did put out a comment stakeholder matrix on, I can't remember now if it was the first revised straw proposal or the second revised straw proposal. I think it was the first, but we have not done one since then. It seems a little chaotic to me because previously, as stakeholders in this forum had noted, we hadn't really been doing stakeholder comments matrix for any stakeholder initiatives. I think there had been a desire to see one of those in this stakeholder initiative, and I think there was some desire expressed in some of the other initiatives. So I know, the ISO did put one together for the EDAM initiative, and we did put one together for this initiative, and we were working closely with the stakeholder affairs team on that, and the customer engagement team. But since then, we I don't know, we haven't heard that is going to be a permanent part of the process. That those were kind of one-off things that we had been talking about internally as a part of our process that we were going to do for those specific initiatives. So I think you are correct. There is still some flux in what the ISO is planning to do and isn't planning to do in terms of responding to stakeholder comments. And I would encourage you to continue to engage with the customer relations and the stakeholder engagement teams on that, as well as express that here. Sorry I don't have a better answer.
No, that's fine. And I'm partially asking to spare you my questions in case there's a written document coming. But what I'm hearing is there isn't. So we have a couple questions about, so let's start with the stated charge proposal. I think my first question that is not crystal clear is, are you proposing to make this change to both the day-ahead formulation and the real-time formulation for the stated charge calculation?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, great. It is not crystal clear in the paper, in the slides, so you might want to, when you think about the final proposal, just adding that level of detail. So the next question that we have for you then is that we'd like to understand better your rationale behind choosing regulation for that type of ancillary service and/or imbalance-like product to include in this multiplier in the stated charge versus the other, let's say, charge or discharge ancillary services, as well as for the real-time formulation FlexiRAM. Can you unpack the reason why we're focusing on regulation instead of the others?
I think typically we would see more charging or discharging from reg up and reg down awards than we would see from spin or non-spin awards. We haven't really done the legwork on that, but I did see that comment in the paper, and that did get me thinking, and I think I've asked that question in some internal meetings, but I don't know that the ISO has a great response to that at this time.
That's fair. One thing that might behoove us to consider as a part of this enhancement is to do some kind of monitoring and reporting on whatever the formulation is, but applying it at least after the fact to the various different ancillary services so that we can track it to see if there is a need to kind of revise this in the future. That you want to make too.
Yeah, I think almost all of these items are going to need to be things that the ISO looks at, regularly reviews. I'd like to see some additional information being put together in those meetings that Guillermo presents publicly to just kind of say, here's the state of the storage resources and all these new initiatives or items from policy from the new initiatives that are coming into place. We really do need to track these and see how effective, how often are these things binding? Are we still seeing issues with storage resources not being able to provide ancillary services if it went away? Those kinds of things. So I totally agree with you, Kathleen, and I'm advocating strongly internally that at the very least we're collecting that data and looking at it internally, but I'd also like to present it externally as well. I think that would be worthwhile for everybody.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, Dave. Thank you for your advocacy internally on that. I do think it will be helpful. I'm not entirely clear myself whether or not the other products are crucial enough to include, so greater transparency would be very helpful. The next question that we have is that we see a very strong interaction between the stated charge calculation itself and how it is included in the ancillary service stated charge constraint. Definitely. I'm less concerned about the end of horizon stated charge constraints in the real-time market. But with the AS stated charge constraint, the day-ahead formulation of that requires 100%. There is no multiplier on the left and right side of that constraint. That includes the ancillary service awards. In real time, it's 50%, give or take, that has to be held under that AS constraint. I'm both confused and concerned about what the interaction is between the stated charge changes you're proposing. If it's going to be a multiplier with a different hourly multiplier, but how that is going to then be incorporated into the AS stated charge constraints so that they result in a rational market outcome. If they're different multipliers, it could cause some market feasibility issues.
Yeah, let me, I think those are all great comments. Can we advance to, I think it's slide 22. It's in the appendix. But this is yes, perfect, okay. So this is the equation that the ISO is proposing updating in this proposal. So it's the equation governing state of charge. The current formulation is the first one. It's relatively simplistic. It says, okay, the state of charge goes down if you get a dispatch award for energy to discharge. The award goes up if you, and we're multiplying by the round trip efficiency of the resource, but the award goes up if you get a charging instruction. That's all the first one says. The second one says, okay, we know you're going to have charging and discharging energy awards, and we know how to take that into consideration, but you could also get awards for regulation up and regulation down, and we think that regulation up and regulation down awards should also impact state of charge, as you say, both in the day-ahead market and the real-time market. You're probably also right, maybe we should even think about other ancillary services as well, but maybe for this initiative, let's get the low-hanging fruit, let's get the reg up and reg down terms. But you're also right. The ISO enforces that constraint on state of charge in the day-ahead and the real-time markets, and the constraint for state of charge is independent from this constraint. So the constraint for day-ahead state of charge says that a storage resource has to have an hour worth of ancillary services in the day-ahead market, and it has to have a half-hour worth of state of charge in the real-time market. So if you and those constraints are directly taken from language in the tariff about requirements for all resources being able to provide ancillary services. So I think there is a little bit of interplay there between the constraint that you're referring to and the tariff obligations for all resources providing AS, and maybe what we really need to do is kind of dig into those requirements and think about how appropriate they are, and perhaps if they need to be updated for storage resources. I don't want to open up that can of worms right now, but that might be something that we need to think harder about in the future. But I think your point is well taken, and we have thought about the interaction between these two constraints internally, but you're right. If you're thinking about a resource that's being awarded regulation in the day-ahead market, and that reg depletes the state of charge for the resource, that constraint that says, hey, you have to have an hour state of charge will bind. If that constraint binds, you could end up getting an energy award in order to provide a future ancillary service award or a future successive ancillary service award. Now, obviously, all this is co-optimized, so you're thinking about all 24 hours across the entire day. You're thinking about profit maximization, not just for your resource, but you're considering the whole universe of resources. So there's a lot of things that play into that final solution. But you're right. Both of these are going to be in the market, and both of them, could change outcomes that we see for storage resources. So I'm not sure if I answered your question, but hopefully I maybe provided a little bit more color and didn't raise too many additional new questions.
I think you helped provide extra context for everyone on the meeting as to why I'm asking my question.
Yeah.
I also hope it is really clear to others, and as you're talking through it, I think I hear you kind of seeing what I'm seeing is that if you reduce the state of charge calculation to remove an expected use of regulation, and then the AS state of charge constraint requires the full amount in that state of charge calculation to be there, it is going to try to drive depending on the side, the charge or discharge from energy to get you back to that state of charge that it expects to see, but it expects to see it because it's assuming it's going to be there because there's no multiplier in that calculation to reduce the required amount in the state of charge. So it is it's definitely concerning, and I really encourage the CAISO to take a step back and just work through a few examples. And it will arrive at the same concern that we have. Just it's a simple revision to include the multiplier in the AS data charge constraint as well. We encourage you to consider it. And with that, Gabe, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. We'll continue to think about that internally. Thanks for the comments, Kathleen. Operator, next call, please.
All right, we'll go with the next caller in queue. Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hello, Gabe. This is Alva again from PG&E.
Hey, Alva.
I think with what you've gone over with Kathleen, I don't have any comments further on the percentage state of charge. I mean, I do think there's a lot of interactions you need to think about in terms of the interaction, what this does to the relative attraction of regulation versus other services. But
Yeah.
that's another conversation, really. I basically, I think you've made your argument as to why you need both of these. We basically were concerned about the interactions, the unpredictable interactions between the two, and I think some of what Kathleen has said is also applicable to the idea that all of these changes are happening at once and that you may see things that you don't want to see. But the main comment I did want to make is I still don't think, and we've made this comment before, and I don't think the draft final proposal explains why there is a need for explicit energy bids in the day-ahead market. In fact, if anything, I think it would imply that you should not have explicit day-ahead energy bids, and that you should treat regulation as you do spin. In other words, you procure regulation on the assumption that you're going to have some support for it. There's going to be an energy bid. In this case, the energy bid is in the opposite direction, but that's certainly just as feasible as saying that you're going to have a real-time energy bid in the same direction pertaining to an award. You decide how much you want to award. You constrain the awards based on the idea that you have to have an energy bid in the other direction to support it. And now you have a must-offer requirement in real time, subject to the normal market power mitigation and default energy bid construction. I don't see the legitimacy of having people put in, and by the way, we always put in energy bids anyway, so this isn't really applicable to our particular approach. But I believe a market participant should have the ability to put in a regulation bid and not an energy bid, have you decide how you want to optimize the regulation, and then put in a real-time energy bid if that is their choice. I don't see the reason, any rationale in what you've said for why there should be a day-ahead energy bid connected to the regulation. All you're doing is having people offer more energy into the day-ahead market that could be taken day-ahead when that's not the intention of the bidder.
Yeah, and I agree. I agree with you, Alva. And I think the reason, in my mind, why I thought that was appropriate is that it would align the outcomes in the day-ahead market with the real-time market. And I think your point is, well, if you actually get awarded energy, or maybe you don't get awarded energy in the day-ahead market, and then you're kind of required to bid this energy in the real-time market, you don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's a valid point. So maybe, and I'm sort of thinking on the fly here, but I think your point's really good and I like it. And I would almost think about maybe improving the policy to say the ISO wouldn't award ancillary services in a way that wouldn't be feasible in the real-time market with these bidding requirements, but you don't have the energy bidding requirement in the day-ahead market.
Right.
Okay, yeah, I like that. Let me continue to think about that. But off the cuff, I would say that's something we could probably accommodate in the final proposal.
Thanks for your consideration, and I don't know if everybody else will agree with it, but I appreciate your.
No, I think that's a nice idea, and it certainly doesn't preclude the bids for energy in the day-ahead market. It just says they're not mandatory until you get to the real-time time frame.
Right.
Okay. Okay, great. I'm just taking a note here. Great. Thanks for that feedback, Alva. That's great. I think there might be a few other hands up in the queue.
Yep, we're going to go to Perry next. Perry, go ahead.
Hey, this is Perry Servideo, GDS Associates. Can you hear me okay, Gabe?
Hey, Perry. Yeah, good morning.
Good morning. First thing is definitely want to echo what Kathleen was pointing out, and just not to pile on to it, but you know, when I start looking at these equations and thinking about what's going to happen in the optimization in real time, there's, you know, in real time there's primarily this trade-off between energy and AS, and the day-ahead AS awards are pretty much fixed. They have a high penalty price. So, you know, just to add two other wrinkles in there that would make it, just to support the thought that it would be good to see some examples on how this would play out in real-time prices. First, you know, as you know, in real time, AS isn't re-optimized and resettled. We may get additional AS. So it's not clear, you know, what using the energy bids would actually accomplish here. And then even if they are used, there's this high penalty price in the scheduling run to reduce AS awards as is today. So when you introduce these new factors into the SOC constraint, you know, I'm wondering what happens to market energy and AS prices in real time with these changes. So maybe just some examples would kind of allay some of, you know, the thoughts that keep me up at night on that issue. That's more of just a comment on that one, just echo Kathleen there. Second, I wanted to just clarify, this gets back to the second, if you can go back to, I think you were on slide 13, it's the second bullet point, the second proposal, requiring the bid. So I wanted to first just clarify have you clarify the issue here. It sounded like in reading through the paper and in previous iterations of the paper that there's this concern, you know, operators observed issues, and you've described it as the SOC being depleted, which is like the big concern. So then if SOCs being depleted, then they can't provide reg up, even though they have a reg up award. Am I right that that's kind of the main issue that we're after here?
Yeah, it really is a concern where, and this is, you're right, Perry, this is actually happening with our operations team today, where storage resources are being scheduled and they're providing, you know, regulation hour after hour after hour, and eventually that resource becomes fully depleted, doesn't have any energy bids in the market, and there's no ability for the market to actually charge that resource back up. So now you've got this resource in the market. It's supposed to be there in real time to provide ancillary services. It can't because it's out of state of charge. And exactly like you say, there's a high penalty parameter for, you know, giving it no pay. So, you know, there's a lot of things going on, and having a little bit of flexibility to charge or discharge that resource and keep it available for that AS award that it got, you know, in the day-ahead market that carried through to the real-time market is going to be beneficial for the operators being able to rely on the capacity that has been procured for AS.
Yeah, that gets back to the first issue on that one, which is why it'd be good to see examples of what's going on with it today. And I almost see it as maybe, you know, getting some AS reoptimization resettlement might actually get the prices right. But, you know, I didn't want to go that far here. It'd just be good first to see the examples. And thanks for clarifying the issue. What's kind of puzzling me is that real, you know, I'm not questioning that operator experience, but it seems at odds with the data that you've published in the appendix. And if I'm reading, and maybe I'm reading the data wrong, but as I understand it, if we just think of the simple all average that you published, you know, if an energy storage resource is awarded reg up and reg down, and typically if they have 100 megawatts of reg up, you'd see a reduction in state of charge of 8 megawatt hours, and you'd see if they were given reg down, you'd see an increase in state of charge of 19 megawatt hours. So what's puzzling to me is if you are providing reg up and reg down, it seems that on average you're going to end up with more state of charge, because the reg down percentage is 19%, the reg up is 18%. I look at that as a constantly sort of increasing state of charge. So I'm wondering if, I guess more about what the operators were seeing there. It looked like, just looking at the data, I say, oh, this is a non-issue. If the resources are getting reg up and reg down, you're going to be getting more and more state of charge in there. It won't be depleted, based on these numbers.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. If you have balanced reg up and reg down awards, then you run the risk of not running out of state of charge, but completely filling up your state of charge, at which point you can't provide reg down. So we do see that happening. We do also see situations where a resource has an energy award in the downward direction to charge, and then a reg up award that's accompanying it, and the resource becomes fully charged, and then you're at a point where you can't. I don't know. Okay, but sorry. So the situation where you've got balanced reg up and reg down awards certainly happens, and when that happens, you can max out your state of charge and can't provide the reg down. So that is an issue. You've also got an issue where you're seeing energy awards, plus or minus 100 megawatt resource. You've got 100 megawatt energy award, but then that's accompanied by a 200 megawatt reg down award. So you get to a situation there where resources become fully depleted. You can still provide the reg down. Okay, I don't know the other one, but the first one is certainly an issue. And I think the other issue could be, well, you've got a reg down award and you don't have any any charging energy bids in, and you run out of state of charge there, and that's actually happening.
Yeah, that's what was puzzling. If they've given you reg up and reg down, it looks like over the course of the day. I mean, there's not 1 hour of the day in which that sort of approach, at least over the fleet, wouldn't end up in a completely depleted SOC. I look at maybe there's a reg down problem, but that wasn't how you guys framed it, which is why I asked that first question.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, so I am understanding the data correctly, it sounds like. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. Yep.
All right, we're going to go over to JP next. JP?
Hey, Gabe. How's it going? This is JP McMahon from Broadreach Power. I had a specific question about the draft proposal as it pertains to requiring the bids alongside the AS awards. On page 6, you mentioned that if a storage resource has insufficient state of charge, the real-time measurement will force a buyback of the AS awards and rescind day-ahead AS payment. And then on page 10, you say not submitting sufficient energy bids in the real-time market would result in a no pay for ancillary service awards from the day-ahead market. In those two contexts, do no pay and buyback mean the same thing?
Yeah, buyback shouldn't be in there. It's no pay for AS.
Okay, got it. That's really all I had. And then one thing while I'm on the line here, to the comments of the prior caller, I think it would also be interesting to see, it looks like the data you published here was from March through May of this year. As more data comes in and more work is done on this, obviously, I think seeing different seasons and how the reg up and reg down, multiplier spread plays out across the year would be very interesting as well.
Yeah, and I think that was the data that we kind of could get our hands on quickly and do some high level analysis quickly. prior to the second revised straw proposal. You're absolutely right, and this was also pointed out in the comments. This is likely a seasonal value. It certainly is going to change. It's going to be different in the summer than the winter. It's going to be different in the fall and spring. So we're going to need to think about how frequently we want to update this and how we want to do the analysis on what we want to update it to, because probably using the data that we used to infer what the value should be for the winter doesn't make a lot of sense. Thanks for the comment. Do we have any other callers in the queue?
We do have a number of callers in the queue, but I believe that Fan would like to speak.
Oh, I think he may have lowered his hand. Let's go to external comments.
All right, great. We'll go to Callie next. Callie, your line is unmuted.
Hi, Gabe. It's Callie Wells with WPTF again. I'll actually keep my comments brief because Kathleen and Alva both hit on the 2 points I wanted to make. So first, regarding the updating the state of charge formulation to account for the impact of regulation. First of all, generally speaking, we support improving how you calculate the state of charge. In our comments, we did ask to see some numerical examples that show the interaction of the new formula you're proposing with the other constraint in the day-ahead market that Kathleen had pointed out that uses now the updated state of charge to restrict what a resource can be awarded for regulation, because there does seem to be some sort of circular nature there. So if you can provide some numerical examples so we can really understand the interaction of those two constraints and what that will do for the awards of the resources and just the market outcome in general would be really helpful, just because it is somewhat concerning if there is a circular nature with those two constraints now. And then my second comment is what Alva was touching on with the energy requirement, and I'm going to focus on the day ahead, so having that energy bid requirement in the day ahead market. If I'm understanding the impact this proposal will have, you're essentially going to be restricting the amount of regulation a storage resource can provide, because you're now requiring it to, the market's going to essentially hold back some of that energy in the opposite direction. And if I'm understanding that impact correctly, WPTF just can't support a proposal that unnecessarily restricts what a resource can be awarded, even if it has sufficient state of charge to provide the full capability for the full hour. It seems really unnecessary, and you get no benefit in the market, in the day-ahead market time frame. Really what that ultimately is going to do is just restrict your supply of regulation in the day ahead, again, really unnecessarily. So we cannot support that part of this proposal in the day ahead, requiring that energy bid in the day ahead market, given that impact. So I'm interested to speak more about what Alva suggested, and see if that might be a better approach that doesn't restrict that in the day ahead time frame. But given the way it's currently formulated, we are extremely concerned with that part of the proposal. But I'll leave it at that, because I think the conversations with Alva and Kathleen really hit on our main points as well.
Okay. Yeah, thanks for those comments.
All right, so we'll go to the next caller in queue. All right, we'll go to Susan.
Hi, Gabe.
Susan, your line is open.
Yeah, hi. I just had a couple of questions. First of all, I wanted to address the whole issue of the comment matrix. I think you kind of missed the forest for the trees here. The comment matrix is just a way of responding to people's comments. What a lot of initiatives do that. Transmission planning, for example, does that a lot. But the main question here, the main issue is not so much did you put anything in a matrix, but did you actually respond to the comments? And so when people make comments and then they don't see those comments reflected in the next proposal and there's no response to them, what they don't know is, did you disagree with it? Did you miss it? I mean, you have a lot going on, and that could happen too. Are you actually assuming that you actually like the comment, but you just didn't put the detail in? People have no way of knowing, and so you end up having to make the same comments over and over again because you don't have any idea if it's just fallen into a black hole. So it's not a matrix. Nobody cares, I think, whether it comes in a matrix, but often in the next version, people will say, well, these people said this and those people said that, and here's what we think about this, and here's why we did include it or we didn't include it. And then you at least understand, first of all, you understand that people actually looked at your comment and thought about it, but that you actually understand what if it's not there, why it isn't, and it's not that just somebody didn't see it. So I just think the response to the comments is what's really important here, not whether you put them in a matrix. And there have been this one, and we had the same complaint about the Hybrid Resources Initiative, where you have no idea if you make a comment whether it's been considered and rejected, or it was missed, or it is actually part of the proposal. It just didn't get down to that detail. So I think that's what people are looking for, not necessarily did you do a matrix.
Understood. Yeah. Thanks for the feedback, Susan.
Okay. And then as far as just as a little more substance here, it sounds like what we did the last time, in the last proposal, you had a few sort of anecdotal examples of noncompliance with regulation, and it hadn't really gotten into, well, why is it that people aren't complying, and what is the issue? Did they disable the governor? What exactly has happened here? Is it did they just run out of state of charge? So it sounds, and just to connect the dots here, it sounds like you have actually looked at that and you believe that what has happened is they ran out of state of charge in part, and possibly in part because of this non-consideration of what the energy impact of the ancillary service award. So is that just sort of connecting all the dots here? Is that kind of where we are right now?
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Okay, all right. It wasn't explicit, and I just wanted to make sure I understood where we were now. And then I just have one question, and I apologize because I know I must be missing something. I apologize, this is a stupid question because I know I must be missing something obvious. But this idea of requiring day-ahead energy bids, it seems like people have must offer obligations to offer their entire suite of services, whether it's ancillary services or energy for each hour in the day-ahead market if you're storage. Don't people have to do that anyway?
Well, I think what this proposal is saying, and let me, let's go down to, okay, let's go down to slide, I think, can we scroll down through the appendix slides, the second slide for the AS proposals? Yeah, this one. Okay. So, this is the example that we outlined in the paper. So, if you have a plus or minus 12 megawatt resource, the idea would be that if you received a regulation up award, you would have to have 6 megawatts of discharge energy available to the ISO, so that bid would have to be in the market. And I totally get Alva's point that maybe you don't have to have that bid in the day-ahead market, but in the real-time market, what happens is, and I think this also gets to Perry's question, you have a regulation award for 12 megawatts, and the resource does not have any kind of charging bid in the market, then eventually, over time, that storage resource becomes fully depleted.
Yeah, no, I understand the concept of the depletion and why you want to take that into account. What I don't understand is a situation where you're in, say, the day-ahead market, and someone doesn't have an energy bid. You have to offer energy and ancillary services, right? I mean, I don't understand how you could just not offer energy when that's part of the must-offer obligation. Again, I realize I'm probably missing something obvious here, but I don't understand how that can happen.
Yeah, so there's no, I think the first point would be that there's no must-offer obligation for charging energy. That's not included in our BPM right now.
Okay. Yes, of course, if you're providing flexible capacity, don't you have to do it for the whole range?
Yes.
Okay, so if this is a resource that would be providing ancillary services, but not not being counted for flexible capacity.
Correct, or not providing resource adequacy capacity, just in general.
Okay, all right. So if it's a resource adequacy resource and they're providing flexible capacity, this is not an issue per se. I mean, you still may have to do the adjustment here for the energy, but in your awards, but you are already going to have the full complement of energy bids in the day ahead market. Okay, so it's only if it's not a resource adequacy resource, or if it's not being counted for flexible capacity.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Are there a lot of storage resources that are not being counted for flexible capacity or are not RA resources?
Well, and the key is that the ISO would have the ability to discharge the resources in these ranges. So the most, and I want to be careful here. You've got this plus or minus 12 megawatt storage resource. The most capacity that storage resource could provide is 8 megawatts of reg up and 8 megawatts of reg down, with energy bids for energy up for 4 megawatts and energy down for 4 megawatts. We would never award the resource for, say, 9 megawatts of reg up and 9 megawatts of reg down, because you couldn't have those accompanying energy bids alongside that.
Okay, but I guess what I'm saying in general, this would be an issue only if the resource either is not, if the resource is an RA resource, and if it's if it's offering flexible capacity, then you will have all of those energy bids already for what you need to
Well, but we don't have any. I mean, this proposal is a proposal to earmark those bids and ensure that we don't get an award for 9 megawatts of reg up and 9 megawatts of reg down, or 12 megawatts of reg up and 12 megawatts of reg down, which is a possible market outcome today.
Okay, but it's not. But the issue is, but you would still have all of the energy bids that you need to do this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I'm not saying those energy bids don't exist. I'm saying they have to be present in the real-time market.
Okay, but they're going to be, at least in the day-ahead market, they're going to be present, right? Because you have to. It's a must-offer obligation in the day-ahead market. Right. I'm not, again, if it's an RA resource and it's counted for flexible capacity, it has a must-offer obligation for everything, basically offering everything in the day-ahead market, right?
So today, this plus or minus 12 megawatt storage resource could and does occasionally get awarded for 12 megawatts of reg up and 12 megawatts of reg down. We are saying that is an outcome that will not happen in the day-ahead market going forward.
Right, but the fact is, maybe I'm not asking this question right. I understand that you're proposing to change that part.
Yeah.
But this idea you're requiring energy bids up to a certain amount of whatever, you're going to have the energy bids you need to do what you are proposing to do. It's not a new requirement for that resource because they already have to offer it to you. Yeah,
the energy bids aren't the real concern here, aside from the fact that they're there, which I totally agree with you, Susan. 90% of the time, most resources that we're seeing in the market participating today, they'll be there because of must-offer obligations. The real concern here is how much AS are we awarding these guys, and if we're fully encumbering the resource with AS, okay, great.
Yeah, that part I understand. I just was confused about the discussion about requiring energy bids when it seemed like they were already required. So it sounds like for the most part, that is not the main problem here.
Correct.
The problem is the awards, and I do totally understand that. Okay. I really appreciate the clarification. Thank you very much.
No, I think those are valid questions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we'll go to Sergio next. Sergio, there you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, maybe let's just jump back up to slide 13. Yeah, and we can't hear you, Sergio.
Excellent. Well, thank you. This is Sergio Eñez with California Energy Storage Alliance, DISA. I would say just sort of a quick reaction to Susan's question.
Mm-hmm.
That difference for RA resources, including that 50%, I think that is what is most material, the concerns. for the storage community, while RA resources would still have that must offer, in the day-ahead market. Establishing that 50% as the threshold is concerning, considering that we haven't seen much detailed analysis to support that 50%. I would say that the closer to what we've seen are those new values that even taken together don't affect the state of charge to that proportion. So I would say a key sort of request or something that we'd love to see is we'd love to better understand why 50%, why exactly would that be, why not 40 or 35?
Mm-hmm.
It's important because it seems like breakdown, it has an averaged out effect of about 20. So if that is the case, I can obviously imagine that in different intervals, that effect might be greater. We're looking there at an average. It's just the central tendency of that. But it would be good, advisable to at least understand what the rationale is there. So that's an important first point. The 50% is material, and we'd like to know why. I would just like very quickly to echo 4 points that I've heard. First, is this really necessary in the day-ahead market? That's something to consider, very important. And second, numerical examples would be great, but I would advise to have a numerical example of just the formula being updated and another one, the same case, but with both the proposed enhancements being applied, both the formula and this required bid. Then the third thing that I really want to echo is a key concern that we have here is when we are updating the new values going forward, we should really look at hour month differences much more clearer way. I would imagine that the data there changes through years, obviously, and maybe volatility even in the same month is present, but doing just a subset of months and keeping it static would be quite concerning. And the final thing that I just wanted to underscore is when we talk about this required bids, ultimately this will have a material effect in supply, as it was noted, and it will have a material effect in the cost of serving food. So advancing this without at least looking at illustrative examples really could be very risky because we don't really understand at this point how that would perhaps drive the need for REG towards other resources, perhaps other resources that have a higher carbon content at the energy that is also being stored in those batteries. So yeah, we'd love to see that, and thank you for your time, Dave. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Thanks for those comments, Sergio. Yeah, I appreciate that. Any other calls in the queue?
I think we are saving some questions for later.
I'm sorry?
I believe we're saving some questions for later.
Are there specific questions or?
I think we still have Callie in the queue. She's come back.
Yeah. Can we open up Callie's line, please?
Sure.
Great. Thank you.
Hi, Gabe. It's Callie Wells with WPTF again. Thank you. I don't mean to belabor this, but your conversation with Susan was super helpful, and there's something that was mentioned during that exchange that I think is extremely important to clarify for myself and everyone on the call. So during that conversation, I think what I heard you said was you're not necessarily proposing these resources be required to submit energy bids in the day-ahead market. I think Susan had a great point. Most of these resources are probably RA, so they already have that obligation today. But you said that the proposal is actually to restrict what they're awarded. And I think it's that distinction that has not been clear in the paper or in these discussions. And it came out of that conversation with Susan. I think it's really important for everyone to understand that that's actually what's being proposed, if I understood that exchange correctly.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Okay, and your example on resources today can be awarded 12 megawatts reg up and 12 megawatts of reg down is not going to be the case going forward. And I'm just going to throw this out there. I don't see in the day-ahead market why that's necessarily a concern if you're talking about a 4-hour battery that has 50% state of charge, so it has 24 megawatt hours stored up, has a zero energy schedule. It can provide the full 12 megawatts reg up and reg down for that full hour and still have plenty of storage capability and energy stored. So I don't understand why that is not a feasible outcome and why the CAISO is in the day-ahead market wanting to restrict that award. I think your changes to the state of charge formulation, once we figure out if there's a circular nature there or not, will help address this issue. So again, we don't see the need for this in the day-ahead market. I think if you improve the state of charge formulation and monitor going forward, I think that is the best step, because it was very useful to understand that you're actually proposing to restrict the regulation awards and not proposing to require energy bids. So
yeah,
I will leave it at that. I know there's been a lot of conversation. I don't mean to take up more time, but that was really helpful clarification.
Yeah, and I'm happy to. Yeah, I think you're right. I think having that additional clarification in the paper could be helpful. But I'm glad we got to have the discussion today. I agree with you. I think the updates to the state of charge formula will help the problem and help get resources situated in such a way that they can generally provide the regulating services or other AS services that they're awarded. But I still do think that sometimes there's going to be situations where they could be potentially out of state of charge, and that's where this could come into play. And, you know, I also agree with you that perhaps this is something that could be addressed in only the real-time market, to say, look, if you're in the real-time market and you're kind of close to your threshold, maybe we think about you know, something we could do there. But I agree, this is not really a day-ahead problem, but I think you do need to marry up the day ahead and the real-time markets to some extent. And yeah, okay. So maybe you're right. Maybe we should just leave it at that. So let's, yeah, great. Thank you for the comment, Callie. I appreciate it. Operator, any other questions? I thought I just saw something come in chat. Is that the case?
I believe it's, yeah, something did just pop in the chat.
Let's see if I can, mine is not displaying very well here. Oh, here we go. Okay. So it, it looks like John Gouda has a question. John, I'm not sure what company you represent, but it says, I was under the impression that CAISO needed the energy offers in order to make awards that leave enough state of charge for regulation awards. Is the CAISO now saying that the energy offers won't be needed? No, I don't think we're saying that at all. I think we're saying that we need available energy offers during periods when resources become either fully charged or fully discharged and are providing regulating services or other AS services and couldn't provide that service if they're fully charged or fully discharged. That's the statement that we're making. I think there is some additional clarification that we could make in the paper just to clarify that, and I'm planning to work on that in the final proposal. Oh, it looks like there was another, sorry, my chat function is not displaying the, okay. There is another question from chat. Ann Yu asks, and Ann, I don't know what your affiliation is either, so I guess if folks are submitting questions in the chat, if you could please include your name and your company that you're affiliated with, that would be helpful for us for tracking these comments. But I think Ann's question is, can you confirm how frequently the dispatch percentage in regulation will be updated so market participants can account for the ISO's assumption of day-ahead stated charge? I do not know the answer to that. That is something that we could think about and take into consideration as we further develop this proposal. Operator, any other questions in the queue?
I am showing a hand raised on the phone.
Okay.
Caller, your line is unmuted.
Thank you. This is Kathleen Colbert from Vistra. I will echo what Callie said, that this has been a very helpful conversation, and it has illuminated that I think the issues that the proposal of the paired energy proportion was trying to address are more complex than what's captured in the proposal as of right now. I hear two. There may be more, but I'm hearing two. One is concern that the dispatches from the day ahead are not feasible in real time, and wanting to look at the feasibility of those dispatches through the state. And I agree with Callie. Also, I had envisioned that the stated charge proposal to include the multiplier was really getting at trying to cure that potential infeasible dispatch. And if it's not going all the way, I think we should explore a little bit further what additional maybe revisions to the stated charge proposal could be done to try to further provide assurance to the operators that the day-ahead dispatches are going to be feasible. So I kind of put a feasibility is what I hear you articulating. And the second piece is when we're in real time, even if we've done everything we possibly can to ensure that the day-ahead awards are as feasible as possible, but there is still a margin of error, and that margin of error is still concerning. And so in the event that the telemetered stated charge that they're seeing, that we see at a resource cannot meet the upcoming ancillary service awards, there needs to be some mechanism to drive the charger to be able to provide that if it is needed on the agency. I hear that second issue, and I respect it. So on that piece, I think that there may be something about getting to a more precise energy offer that's there, or something that can be inserted to get to the precise amount needed to drive it back into good standing. And when I say good standing, I kind of think of whatever we define that AF stated charge to be, if it's going to use the new multipliers or whatever the decision is. But like that's kind of that's the benchmark. You need to meet telemetry stated charge needs to be able to meet those requirements 50%. If that's good standing today, if it's the multiplier tomorrow, a way to drive that, even if there isn't an energy offer submitted to ensure reliability, I think is the second issue I hear you articulating. Is that a fair recap? That's what I synthesized from the back.
Yeah, I think that's a fair recap, yeah.
I would really encourage you to try to break it out similarly in the next iteration and kind of think about framing these proposals a little, precisely to the feasibility issue, proposed to make market dispatch changes versus the insufficient charge or discharge capability issue, and how to cure that and ensure that the AF stated charge constraints can also work for these resources in the next iteration. That will add a lot of benefit to those of us evaluating it, that level of clarity. And I think this conversation has driven this forward. So I thank you for it and just encourage you to think about reframing.
Yeah. No, I think those are all good points. Okay, I appreciate the feedback, Kathleen. Any other questions in queue?
No questions in chat, Gabe.
Great.
And just for those on the call, the last two chat questions were from Ann Yu from CES and John Good from PNM. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to slide 14. I do think the good news here, well, actually, let's go back to slide 13 just for a minute. I did kind of want to re-highlight this fifth bullet, this fifth sub-bullet. I don't think, and I think this is well within the realm of the questions and conversations that we've had already, but and I don't want to belabor this anymore, but yeah, the ISO is open to tailoring those requirements and thinking about how we want to set them maybe strategically and maybe have them change hour to hour, because we know that the actual draws on state of charge are going to differ from hour to hour. So we're certainly not taking that off the table. I think all the comments about kind of maybe even providing more details and more clarity about why these are issues and what the issues are, I think is all helpful. We're certainly going to be taking that into consideration as we go from this draft final to the final proposal. Okay, so let's go to the next slide, slide 14. With that said, I think given the comments that we've seen, the written comments, I think those were the more controversial slides, and I think we've kind of maybe hopefully done the hard work today, and these next few might be a little bit easier. We are proposing new exceptional dispatch tools for storage resources. The new tools are going to be different than the old tools. The current exceptional dispatch tools can specify a particular amount of power from a resource at any given time. So we need 50 megawatts from this resource or that resource. We can specify that through the exceptional dispatch tools we have today, and those can be applied to storage resources. What we've identified, what our operations team has identified, is that additional tools may be required to tell storage resources to hold state of charge. So we want a particular resource to charge up to 350 megawatt hours. We want them to hold that state of charge from, say, 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. But after 6 p.m., if they start to discharge because prices are high, that's fine. We may need that for local concerns. We may need that for system concerns on very tight days. We may need that for some other reason if the ISO operators just want to ensure that there's some state of charge from some of the storage fleet that's out there. Yeah, the same question came up here. Is this going to apply in the day ahead and or the real-time market? This tool would only apply in the real-time market. We don't really anticipate needing to exceptionally dispatch storage resources to hold state of charge in the day-ahead market. We're only anticipating using that in the real-time market right now. And I know in previous calls we've gone through the opportunity cost methodology to compensate storage resources, and what we're planning to do, and we've iterated on this, and I think we've made some good improvements here too, but we're comparing two counterfactual energy schedules. So basically one schedule with the exceptional dispatch in place and one schedule without the exceptional dispatch in place. We're comparing the revenues, and if there's higher revenues in that schedule without the exceptional dispatch in place, we would be awarding the resource an uplift payment equal to the difference between the two counterfactuals that are run. Okay, so this is, again, the high-level details about the exceptional dispatch tools. Are there any questions or comments on this? Operator, are you there? Any
yes,
hands
I'm
in
here.
the queue? Okay. Any hands in the queue?
I'm not showing any hands raised at this time.
Great. Thank you. All right. Let's advance to the next slide then, slide 15. And, okay, this is the proposal on co-located storage resources and the ability to, and this was a big ask from the storage community at the onset of this initiative, they wanted to avoid grid charging. So essentially what we've done is we've developed an alternative model where we would only be charging storage resources that are co-located when there is on-site generation scheduled from renewable resources. So you've got a 50 megawatt battery paired with a 100 megawatt solar resource. The solar resource during a particular hour is only scheduled for, or maybe a particular real-time interval is only forecast at 38 megawatts. So we're not going to schedule the storage resource to charge in excess of 38 megawatts during that particular interval. And the ISO is going to do this by inserting a constraint that's going to ensure that the charging schedules are just less than or equal to the output from the renewable resources that are co-located with that storage resource. And I think to one of Susan's earlier points, I know that some of the comments were about cleaning up the language in this section, and hopefully we have achieved that with the final proposal that we have out there right now. This functionality would apply to the day-ahead and the real-time market. So this constraint would apply in both if you're not seeing schedules in the day-ahead markets for renewable resources, which is possible. We would be willing to allow these storage resources that are opting into this functionality the ability to self-schedule. So if you know that during hour ending 9 you want to charge the storage resource maybe at 30 megawatts, you can self-schedule that into the market, and that would be acceptable even if there is no schedule for the on-site renewable. The ISO is all, and we did not include this last sub-bullet in the paper. We were still in conversations with technology when we published the paper and put it out on the website, but one of the proposals was also, or some of the feedback on the previous proposal was to include functionality to have this sort of constraint toggled on or off for particular hours. So if say you didn't want a grid charge from hour ending 16, 17, 18, but you did want a grid charge all the rest of the hours of the day, we could have functionality in the bids that are submitted to the ISO to say, yes, I want the constraint applied to this subset of hours, and again, that could be applicable in the day-ahead market and the real-time market, and then other hours of the day, the constraint would not be applied, and that is certainly functionality, at least from a technological standpoint, that I think we will be able to offer. I do intend to include this as part of the proposal in the final proposal that we're going to be working on after we get comments back from this initiative. I think the other aspect of the proposal is that we are offering the ability for storage resources to back down when energy renewables does not exceed the schedule. So, we've got a forecast of 38 for our renewable component. We've got a schedule of 38 for the renewable component in the RTD market. However, the actual output from the renewable at a precise point in time is only 28 megawatts because there's cloud cover or something. And in that particular case, we would allow a storage resource that has this functionality applied for this particular hour to back down to that 28 megawatt level. This would only apply for storage resources that are using this paradigm during that particular interval. If you're you haven't checked the box that you only want to avoid grid charging, then you sort of don't get to do this. This is only for resources that do want to avoid grid charging. Okay. So this is kind of the summary of the policy that we're thinking about for co-located storage. Do we have any questions in the queue right now?
Hi, Gabe. We do have Susan Schneider.
Great.
And we can go ahead. Sharon, can you please unmute her line?
Yeah. Hi, Gabe. Yeah, it's we're really close. So first of all, I want to thank you again for including this in the initiative, and also for including the clarification that we had asked for, that it would apply to the forward schedules and also to real-time operations. And this idea that you can do it on specific hours, that was one of our asks also. So thank you very much for that. I think that will mean that a good part of the time, a lot of resources might not even do this, but sometimes they might. And so I think it just gives it's a lot more flexibility, and maybe will help the market as well that way. The only part though that I think is still questionable is when you say that the resources that you could self-schedule, if you're talking about solar and storage, you could self-schedule the storage. Well, you could do that today. So that doesn't really avoid. What that means is, even though there's not a must-offer obligation for the solar in the day-ahead market or for wind, you are forced to schedule it, even if it's a self-schedule. And why would you do a self-schedule? But you're forced to do it in the day-ahead market in order to take advantage of this option.
Sorry. Yeah, that is my fault. This is I should have been more clear on the slide. But these self-schedules I was thinking about were self-schedules for the storage resource. So if you wanted to self-schedule a storage resource to charge, you could do that, and you wouldn't necessarily need a schedule for your wind or your solar resource.
Well, yeah, but then what you're doing is basically forecasting. You may have a day ahead forecast for your solar or wind, but basically forced to. Well, I don't think you really want people to self-schedule storage, and I think that what I think would be better here is to allow them to provide a forecast so that it would constrain the charging award in the day-ahead market, and then when the actual schedule comes in real time, to do the calibration at that point, after the real-time settlement. I think that you don't. I think first of all, having them self-schedule charging basically says, well, regardless of price, I want to do that, and that I don't think that's very efficient to do that. I think you might say, I don't, because I think I'm going to have this much solar, I want to not get a charging schedule. But you may also want to bid your solar in real time economically, and then have the adjustment made in the real time market. So I just don't, encouraging this to be resolved through a self schedule just doesn't seem like quite the right way to do it either.
Okay. So you've got a resource, and you co-located facility. You've got a 50 megawatt storage resource, a 100 megawatt solar resource. 9 o'clock in the morning, and you're thinking about a day ahead schedule. And in this scenario that you're thinking of, Susan, you could potentially have a solar resource that doesn't have an energy award at 9 o'clock in the morning, even though you fully expect that in the real-time market that resource will be available and it will be producing. So I'm not sure.
We're in the day-ahead market, right? We're talking about the day-ahead market. Okay.
Yeah, you're thinking about the day-ahead market.
The solar doesn't have a bid. The solar is not required to bid. It doesn't have a bid, so therefore it doesn't have a schedule. Yes.
So so you've got no schedule. So I'm kind of interested in what you want in terms of functionality for the co-located storage resource.
Okay, so let's say the forecast, and let's sort of go with your example. Let's say the forecast for that solar for 9 in the morning is 38 megawatts. Okay. So under your formulation, you would basically, they have to offer everything. So let's assume they're being counted for flexible capacity also, since most of them are, and it's an RA resource. So they're offering plus or minus 50. You may constrain their awards based on all the other things we talked about. But basically, they would have the ability to say, well, I'm expecting 38 megawatts of solar, so please don't give me a charging schedule any more than 38 megawatts. That's not self-scheduling anything. That's just that it's basically the constraint you're already talking about, and just say, don't give me an award of more than 38 for charging. Now, then when you get to real time, when the actual schedule for the solar comes in, let's say it comes in at 40, okay, but you've already constrained the charging in the day-ahead market to 38 megawatts, you'd allow another 2 megawatts of charging to come in the real-time schedule for the storage resource.
So the real time, the way that we've got this constraint set up right now, or we're thinking about setting up this constraint, would do that. If you have a schedule for 38 for your solar in the day ahead market, you could get a schedule to charge the resource at 38 in the day ahead market.
Right, but let's assume you don't have that. If that's how it's working out, there's no problem. It'll all work out. Yeah. But let's say you don't have, there's no requirement. Let's say you don't have the solar in the solar chart schedule in the day ahead market.
Yeah, and then obviously in the real time market, if your solar was scheduled for 40, you could get a storage charging schedule of up to 40. So,
That's
okay,
right.
so let's set the real-time market aside. Okay, so we've got this issue in the day-ahead market where you've got a storage resource, it gets no energy award, but we are forecasting the resource to provide, 38 megawatts. And you're saying during that interval, even though the resource doesn't have an energy award, you can't, you would be okay with having the optimization schedule the storage resource for up to 38 megawatts for charge.
Yeah, right. And I think,
Okay.
of course, you could have economic bids that way. And I mean, there are just ways that, instead of a self-schedule means basically it's going to have a charging schedule of 38 megawatts. But let's say they want to bid that economically, maybe they only get it 20 megawatts. That would be okay, because they're not getting a charging schedule of more than what the solar would be produced or is forecasted at.
So let me follow up with the technology team on kind of the feasibility of developing something like that, because I'm not, I would imagine that the forecast information is something that would be available to add into this constraint, but I'm not totally sure. So I think that would be something that we would need to verify before we could propose something like that.
Okay, it just seems like a much more efficient thing to do than to say, no matter what prices I want to charge 38 megawatts.
Yeah,
and which is a day-ahead forecast, may not even be that accurate, who knows, but you wouldn't want to take the economics out of it, I don't think.
It is a little funny, because if you're not scheduling your, if you're not scheduling your solar resource in the day-ahead market, but you're obviously going to have it there in the real-time market.
Right, you're required to.
Does it make sense to schedule the storage resource? I'm legitimately asking here.
Storage has a must-offer obligation, and what their whole idea here is that you don't want your storage to be scheduled to charge more than what the solar is going to produce. If you completely ignore the fact that there's solar and don't even give it a charging schedule day ahead, that doesn't seem very efficient. If you make it reserve something and have a huge self-schedule day ahead, that doesn't seem very efficient.
Okay.
So, the idea is to make sure you don't cut out the economics here.
Okay.
And I think that will just come out with you'll see a better result that way.
Yeah. All right. Well, let me. I think let me talk to the technology team and see what they can do. I don't know that we can make promises, but I see what you're saying, that just allowing storage resources to self-schedule really doesn't solve this problem. So I understand it now.
I don't think you want them to do that. In fact, if they're providing flexible capacity, they really can't. They have to provide economic bids.
Exactly. That's right. Yep. Okay. Yeah. Any other questions, Susan?
Nope. That's it. Thanks so much. And again, thank you for all of the work you've done on this. This proposal is really close and really is going to go a long way toward making people comfortable with operating in the market when they're able to. And just hopefully this will be temporary for as far as ITC goes. But it's a really good tool. And thank you very much for including it.
Well, thanks for that feedback, Susan. I appreciate it. Okay. I see. It looks like we've got a couple other calls in the line.
Caller, your line is unmuted.
Hi, this is Doug Boach in Yone for City and County San Francisco. Just following up on the point Susan made, I guess I was thinking about a slightly different solution, which is, you optimize the storage, and if you have a renewable resource that's economically bidding, that is clearing at less than what the market wants to charge at. If you allowed that resource to have a sort of a bidding flag that says, hey, if this is the best time to charge my resource, even though the price is lower than my bid for PV, I'm willing to accept a lower price if it's going to go to charge my storage. Because that's which is similar to what I think you're thinking. If you're just saying, indicate that you can schedule charging, but not award the day-ahead price. But I would think it's a lot less risky to actually have those prices align. In other words,
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and I think there could be some additional burden when it comes to, because I mean, legitimately, what we're talking about right now is a constraint that says what I see from my solar is the maximum amount I can charge my storage resources. I think what you're talking about now is, well, we might think about a little bit of flexibility in terms of prices that we back down our solar at, and I think that solution gets a little bit more complex.
Well,
not to say that I'm taking it off the table, but that's kind of the way I'm thinking about this right now.
I'm not sure it's that complicated because because otherwise what I have to do is I have to guess which intervals are going to be scheduled for charging, and I have to say, I don't care what the price is. I'll pay you to take my solar. And the approach that Susan laid out, you could get this mismatch between day-ahead and awards for generation versus the charging, and then you've got this price risk going into real time. And alternatively, you could say, hey, if I'm going to get this, the market wants to charge, go ahead and if the seller is saying I'm willing to charge my resource at any price, I should say I'm willing to accept a price for my renewable because it's going to roughly match up with the price for the charging, I'll take that award. And, maybe this is only going to be an issue in the springtime, weekends.
Yeah.
But, and I haven't seen it yet, but I think it could be a problem. And right now, there's I think it will be easier for the optimization model to fix this problem than it will be for market participants in their bids to fix the problem, because you just don't know when
Yeah, I think I need to think about this one a little bit more, but this is an interesting point. So I appreciate what you're getting at.
Great, thanks.
Well, thanks for the comment, Doug. Any other callers in the queue?
Yes, we have one more. Caller, your line is unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Gabe. This is Rahul Kalaskar from AES. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
So, first I want to echo what Susan mentioned. This is very, very close to what we were requesting. So thank you, ISO, for doing that. I just add one more point to this discussion. I think it gets really complicated from an implementation perspective when you think of all the aspects of the day-ahead market. One other piece in this equation would be, how do you account for virtuals? So would you include virtuals as part of the constraint that would restrict charging, or would you allow virtuals to be part of the supply, assuming to be solar? So my recommendation would be provide as many features as possible for the storage to optimize, so people can make optimal decisions, and then just explain the proposal of how it will be implemented, or what's the possible way to use this feature, because I don't think one approach fits all would apply, because there are a lot of unique situations that would be different for each resource. So as many features that are available for resource, scheduling coordinator to choose would be better rather than one prescribed way.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point, Rahul, and I haven't really thought a whole lot about that, so we'll continue to consider that as we go forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. I appreciate it. Operator, any other questions in the queue?
We have one more from Susan again.
Okay.
Real quick, I just wanted to respond to Don. I think the whole point here is not to say I'm going to do anything regardless of market prices. That was why I was trying to get away from the self-schedule issue. So I'm not taking bid prices, market prices that are lower than bid prices or anything like that. The whole idea is to make the market work, allow people to do their economic bids where they want to, and hopefully and just make sure the volumes all match, but with that constraint, but not to have anybody do any more. So I know the CAISO is not a big self-scheduling fans, and the market increasingly is not either. So the whole idea is to keep the rest of the market working properly and allow people to put those economic prices where it makes sense.
Yeah, I think I just need to think a little bit more about Doug's idea there, but I think what you said is exactly accurate, Susan. Yeah. Thanks for that follow-up. Okay. Any other questions in the queue right now?
There are no further questions at this time.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. Let's go ahead on to the next one, and this is my last slide. So I think at this point, if anyone has any other questions or comments that we haven't covered, I know we've covered quite a bit, and it's been very helpful for me, and I think I'm encouraged by some of the comments, and I think there's still a little bit of work to do. But I do appreciate the dialogue. And I would say that this is probably has been our least controversial item out of everything in the proposal. So let's get to it. Essentially, we are proposing that pseudo-tie resources could perform very similar to the way that we're setting up the co-located model for resources today. The ISO is planning to allow resources outside of the ISO balancing area that have, reduced size of transmission and interconnection capability. So, you've got the 100 megawatt solar, 50 megawatt storage. You only have 100 megawatts of interconnection. You've got 100 megawatts of transmission to the California ISO border. Today, you have to have the full 150 megawatts based on the language that we have around how to set up pseudo-tie resources, but we're willing to relax that to allow the pseudo-tie resources to function more like co-located resources. So if you do have just that 100 megawatts or even something less than 100 megawatts of transmission, we can model that with an aggregate capability constraint to say, never dispatch this combination of two resources in excess of whatever the shown transmission is. And then basically you've got pseudo-tie resources that are performing in the market just like other co-located resources in the California ISO footprint. We're not planning to exclude pseudo-ties from other co-located functionality, at least nothing that I'm thinking about. So all of the new functionality that we're planning that we just went through in the last slide, that would also be applicable, if approved by FERC and all that fun stuff, that would be applicable to the pseudo-tie resources. And then the requirements that we put in the draft final proposal and the previous proposals would still be applicable, that these resources will have to get approval from the other balancing authority that they're actually located in, and then the requirements that the resources have to be in the same balancing authority area. They can't be one in balancing authority A and one in balancing authority B. Those rules are still in place, and I think those are relatively common for pseudo-tie resources. So I think if all of those requirements are met, then the ISO will be able to model them just like co-located resources today. So we'll check one more time for any last thoughts or comments in the queue before I turn it over to Brenda to conclude. Operator, any comments online?
Yes, we have one more.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Hi, Gabe from Susan. Hey, just thank you again for putting this in. We really appreciate the you're making the correction here, and anyway, just thanks again.
Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. Operator, any other comments?
There are no further questions at this time.
Excellent. Well, I'll turn it over to Brenda to conclude. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabe. So thanks, everyone, for those who are still with us at this time. Our Energy Storage Enhancement Initiative draft final proposal. Comments will be due November 9th, 2022. At this, that you can be able to submit them at the ISO commenting tool, and it's available at this time. We also have our Stakeholder Symposium coming up this November 9th and 10th at the Safe Credit Union Convention Center in Sacramento, California. You can follow the following information on www.kaiso.com/stay informed and Stakeholder Symposium for other additional updates on the symposium. And thank you for those who are already registered with us, as well as many of Dave, we can hear your background.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm shifting around here. Sorry.
And as well for those, thank you for all the sponsors that so far has registered with us. You can also see them posted on the website for the Stakeholder Symposium. And you're still able to sign up for that as well. And this meeting will be concluding pretty soon, but other than that, the next few slides are appendix, and those are available right now on the slides. So we won't be able to cover those at this time, but thanks so much, everyone. I'll send it back to my event producer, Sharon, to close this meeting.
Thank you so much for using Event Services. That concludes our conference. You may now disconnect.